Today's webinar is being recorded and a link to the archive version will be shared on our website and social media accounts and sent to all registrants via email as well. Welcome to Building a Culture that Promotes and Enables Lifelong Learning, today's session of the Rutgers Business School Signature Leadership Series. Today's webinar is offered in valued partnership with Tech United NJ. Previously known as the Tech Council of New Jersey, Tech United NJ empowers innovators, entrepreneurs, and instigators, and we thank them for their support. Now it is my pleasure to introduce our moderator. Peter Methot is an assistant professor of professional practice and associate dean of executive education at Rutgers Business School. And he didn't want me to say too much about him to leave a maximum amount of time to talk about our presenter and our series. So Peter, I'm going to hand things off to you.
Thank you, Margaret, very much. Appreciate your introductions and facilitation. So thank you very kindly. So first, let me talk about what we're doing here today. As part of this series, we're building on the 4 R's, the 4 leadership principles that Dean Lele has established for Rutgers Business School. And just in my own paraphrase, and let me just talk through the 4. Resilience, first and foremost. It's the idea around positivity and grit to overcome adversity. Resourcefulness, has a lot to do about creativity and problem solving. Responsibility, having to do very shortly with ethical judgment and accountability. And then lastly, the one that we're really going to probably spend the most of our time on today, this idea of reinvention, this idea of embracing learning and growth and change as a core value as a leader. So that's what we're going to be doing today. We're going to be obviously speaking with Matt Kane from Johnson & Johnson. I'll give you a bit about him in a second here. But the focus will be around using not only Matt's experience as a leader and his journey, but also his responsibility as a leader in developing this culture of learning at his organization and letting it be a lens for us to learn about how we all can embrace learning, and particularly lifelong learning, at the core of our mindset. So if you would progress, Margaret, thank you. So let me introduce you to Matt Kane. Obviously, you can read the bio in front of you that you can see here. I'll share a few quick remarks that's not in here, but well, actually, it is at the very bottom. Matt is he serves on the board of advisors for executive education. His role in developing leaders at Johnson & Johnson put him in a wonderful spot to be a tremendous resource and advisor for us in executive education. Always looking at what are the macro trends, what's happening all around us in our business environment, and then directly how does that affect the needs, the changing needs for human capital development and sort of a ever-changing business landscape. So Matt brings with him many years of his own formal experience in learning, but also the idea around how do we build learning into work, right? How do people learn in the flow of work, both formally and informally? So that's going to be the core of our topic. And so Matt, welcome. Thank you so much for sharing your time with us. One last little bit about Matt. It's always hard to get time on Matt's calendar because he is so busy all around the world with responsibilities, really with no bounds. So thanks again for being here, Matt.
Thank you. Yeah.
Much appreciated.
Honored to be here today. Hello, everybody.
So I wanted to start off, Matt, if you would, just maybe giving an introduction to your, it's called the Matt story, right? I know it scans many years and many changes over the way, but I think maybe just a brief introduction to kind of your path into not only leadership, but also your path into learning as a focus and prioritization for your career.
Yeah, thank you so much, Peter, and hi everyone again. I often like to think about this, and it was only a couple years ago that I had this distinction when I think about where I am and sort of talk about some of the high level moves, but it really goes back to when I was a kid and my grandfather, and he always used to say, no matter what we were doing, If you don't know something, say you're willing to learn, right? And this is like earliest memories I have of him and growing up, and he was sort of always around, jack of all trades and stuff, and just was somebody who figured stuff out. And so this idea of figuring things out, and again, always like, don't act like you know everything, don't be a know-it-all, but be a learn-it-all, and admit when you don't know something. I didn't realize how fundamentally that shaped my life, right? And so how has that shaped my life? Started at J&J a number of years ago. Before that, did undergrad and grew up in Philadelphia. And so came to J&J and through a leadership development program, which was also all about like moving around different parts of the companies, getting experience. At the time, I was saying, wow, what's going to allow me to learn the most about the company I go to? What's going to allow me to experience a number of different things? And so lots of companies nowadays have these type of programs where you can, again, get exposed to lots of different things, or you can just create your own movement within companies. And so I started in digital, or at the time we were calling it like information technology. It started so long ago that we were doing like network cables that you had to plug into the wall and all that type of stuff. And so that world has changed a bit. But after a while in digital and moving around different areas supporting the business, went over into marketing. And so I was supporting our marketing group at the time. Digital marketing or websites were sort of becoming a thing. I did some of the first websites for J&J. Again, that's how long I've been around, and really helped bring that to marketing, but also just worked in our skincare business in a completely new area, learning all about skincare. And so I spent a lot of time, working with scientists to develop products and things like that as well, while also just doing the marketing side. Again, totally different field. I often say by that point, I worked in a number of different countries in digital, but I went from the first floor to the third floor of our building and had the biggest culture change ever. It was that different, right? And with peers who were sort of grown up in that space. And then after a while in that, went to some, again, hybrid roles, wanted to keep experiencing other functions within the business, did about a year and a half in a procurement type role, looking at new supplier innovation. And then through a whole bunch of things, came over to our global talent management organization, which for J&J is the organization which essentially runs a number of talent management functions, everything from our recruiting side all the way up to the assessment side or the succession side for our most senior leaders. And so all different areas of talent. And again, within that organization now over the last 8 or so years, a number of different roles and things, but primarily around learning and development and sort of head of learning world. J&J is big and decentralized in many ways. We have a number of different business units. And so we have also a number of different learning groups, depending on where you are and what function you're in, et cetera. But our group minds the overall enterprise approach to leadership development and learning.
So it cues me into something that you and I briefly discussed in several months ago and most recently, this idea of the learning T, right? And right, so for anyone that's not familiar, the width, right, is having a huge breadth, often most resembled by like an MBA sort of activity, right? You can look across the entire business, and you get that sort of knowledge scape. Alternatively, there's the deep knowledge, right? So there's deep expertise, and just given the audience that we have today, you seem to have grabbed a lot of the top side of that learning, right? You meaning the wide T, you went across the organization into lots of different functions. And so I was wondering if maybe you could just share your thoughts around the T, meaning how important is maybe the width earlier in your career versus the depth, and so how does one think about that strategically from a learning perspective?
Yeah, great question. And I think that T comes up a lot. And in fact, over the course of my career, it's come up in almost every career conversation where people, directly ask me, like, do you want to go deeper here? Or do you want to continue to experience new things? And I often say yes and, right? Like almost just that approach. And so, I think the T is incredibly important. I think depending on what you want to do and what you want to get out, and I would say at that time, right? Because my preferences have shifted over time. When I was in digital for a while, like I thought, okay, I'm going super deep. I want to be the most digitally, oriented person, and I'm going to go, deeper and deeper in this particular area. And then after a while, it was like, oh wow, you get exposed to something new, and you say, well, maybe I want to actually go experience that and combine things in some cases too. So I think when I think about talking to people about what to do strategically, it's about following whatever you're going to be most interested in, because you can be ultra successful going very wide with the right strategies. You could be ultra successful and fulfilled personally, again, either going wide or going completely deep, right?
Yeah.
I think the other thing to recognize in either case is that in many areas, especially with the rapid pace of change of today, no matter which way you choose, it's not like one is static versus the other. You're never going to learn everything about a subject, even if you spend the next 50 years of your life doing that. In fact, by year 49, you'll realize more that you don't know than in year 1, right? And because you'll continue to hone your skills there. And so whether you're wide or deep or create a whole nother letter besides the T, there's still an opportunity to, and a requirement in a way, right? To continue to learn, to continue to grow, to continue to challenge yourself, uncover the next thing. And so just one more thing on this, I think also a great example about maybe an MBA being wider. I also think what's really amazing nowadays, again, when you think about 20 years ago or 10 years ago even, or maybe 2 weeks ago, the T used to have a certain range and a certain depth.
Mm-hmm.
Now, because of the interconnectedness of most things and the way that you can leverage learning between things, like the range is wider than ever before. In fact, many people would say an MBA is actually really deep. And instead, somebody who spent time doing an MBA as well as a super intense computer science degree, as well as thermodynamic engineering, like that's the wide range today, because people have access to more learning than they ever did before, more skills. Learning is right at our fingertips. There's many more amazing places you can go. So whether you want to go deeper or wider, the range is almost infinite nowadays.
Yeah, that's it's a great point, and it's funny. I sometimes I feel old, Matt, talking about the T, right? Because we've been talking about it for so long. To me now, it's probably more like a quadrant, right? Like it's just expanding and like the different ways that we learn. So kind of going along that line of thinking, I wonder if we might do one more compare and contrast here. And to me, that's around formal versus informal learning, right? I think of formal much more like the classroom, right? Like getting together and you have a structured either topic or focus area versus the informal, the coaching, the conversation that happens around the office, the experiences, if you will. And I wonder if maybe you could just talk from your lens, how does one think about those two things, right? Trying to create the balance in their life between carving out dedicated time versus also leaving yourself open to some of the other informal learning. And I know it's kind of a tough question, but just from your perspective, what is the success metrics or success ideas for the people that you've seen through your work?
Yeah, I think great question. And at least the first part, right? Because I think finding time and how to do that in strategies is also another incredibly important and tough question. And but I think so for folks who may have heard of it before, because fortunately or unfortunately it's still used a lot, there's this framework of like 70-20-10, right? So 70%, and when we're talking about learning, 70% of the stuff is like from on the job or practical practice and the activities you do. 20% from maybe trainings and like in classroom type stuff, and then 10% from other means or like reading books on your own or something like that. I think we try not to use that model as much anymore, right? Because of the blurred lines between everything nowadays, and the way there's some now maybe a couple of years old, but this idea of learning in the flow of work as well too, right? Like, or think about when you're trying to do something on a website or in a tool like Microsoft Word or something, and you don't know. You don't stop and take a class. You just go to YouTube, look it up real quick. Or a couple years ago, Microsoft's famous paperclip would like pop up on screen and like say, "What are you trying to do?" Or even in PowerPoint now, it automatically suggests design ideas for what your slide could look like to make it look better, right? So there's all these additional tools. So that goes back to again, I think maybe this relates to strategies as well too, is learning happens everywhere, or should and could be happening everywhere nowadays, right? There's no more classroom. Like, what is a classroom anymore, right? Like, I really hope we get to go back to classrooms sometime soon, like physical spaces. But I have more access to knowledge and training and materials on my phone or on my watch than most people had 5 years ago in any classroom in any part of the world. again, this idea of learning while you do things, you can also learn while you're on the job doing things. And so I think the most important thing is to remember and identify that there's opportunities to learn anywhere and from anyone almost nowadays too. You can also, and again, we run trainings across the world in classrooms pre-COVID and hopefully post-COVID. But we have great teachers or facilitators show up to those trainings to help, or business leaders to help train. But you're also bound by certain constraints, like who can show up at that time, what play, and getting space, right, and schedules and all of this, and as opposed to I can go online now and learn calculus or learn whatever from the greatest teacher in the world, or the greatest business coach in the world as well too for strategy. So I think again, just remembering that it's all unbounded, and then that relates to finding the time as well too. I think. A mentor of mine often says, like, we never have time, or when people talk about work-life balance or work-learning balance or learning-life balance, nobody ever says, like, I have a shower-life balance problem, right? Because it's just something you do every day, and you're going to do it, and it's a ritual, it's part of your life. And so I would also say that making learning a priority and making it easy and in the flow of things you do, it's not about having to carve out these massive amounts of time as much anymore. That is important. Like, we also will do things where we take leaders away for a week of truly immersive, specialized type learning, or going to a classroom for 30 minutes, 90 minutes, 3 hours, allows you to learn differently. But it's really just about prioritizing that time and finding ways to fit it in, like everything else in our lives.
It's so true. I mean, this idea of I love the shower example, right? Because once upon a time, I would agree with you that shower was a given.
Yeah. Okay.
Nowadays, it's a little less given, but I'm with you.
Or even sorry, one more. Like, my favorite, because I have to say that, is commuting time. Right.
Yes.
Like, I've had times where I've had a 2.5-hour commute each way to work, which is horrible. Don't ever put yourself in that situation. But I've learned more on my commutes than I've learned almost anywhere besides school, university time period, because that was, a focused time period too as well. So there's ways to find learning everywhere. I wonder often when I'm on the subway in New York, like, how many people with their headphones on are learning something, verse music, verse. All of those things are great, but maybe mix it up a bit more than just doing one thing.
Yeah, I'll do a self-disclosure here that probably my biggest miss since having to be virtual, not going to the office, is I missed that 30 minutes of quiet time. It was always my reflection time on the way to the office, that I was kind of moving through things, and so I've had to try to manufacture that into my day now, which is harder when you have other distractions in the household. But I'm with you.
Which that reflection, sorry, just to piggyback on that, that reflection is probably the most important part of learning, right? Because you can listen to a lecture all day, take down notes, that makes it stick a bit better. But the act of reflecting on it and creating that space and not being bombarded with the digital distractions or the 800 other things actually allows you to make that learning real for yourself as well too, right? So also being very intentional about building in space to just be distraction free, right? And not have to schedule every minute of the day is really important for learning as well.
Yeah, one of the things, and I'm pulling this is coming from one of the questions, and it was kind of going along the lines. So I'm going to try to put together my question and their question. The question was right around the J&J culture that gives people the flexibility to move around, right? I think you agree with that. We're seeing more and more companies that are doing that, right? They understand that a well-rounded experience is helping to build not only knowledge, but passion, right? By experiencing other things, you're able to find the passion. I wonder if you could talk maybe a bit about how J&J came on that reality, meaning how did that become baked into the rhythm of work at J&J, meaning the cross-functional experience, the ability to move around. Maybe just talk to the process of how that gets done inside the organization.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there was never one day where it became a thing, right? But maybe just speaking about some of the history. Now, J&J's been around for 130 years, and so I don't know all the history, although I am a student of J&J's history because it's great learning as well too. But I remember when I moved functions the first time from digital over to marketing, I was probably one of 5 people who, depending on which senior leader you talk to, they've ever heard about doing that, right? And so I felt special, but it was less common. Now it happens, it's formalized, it's even more, people understand it. And so why did that happen, right? Over the arc of this like last 18 years. One, because again, I think every business, not just J&J and everywhere else, and even in our personal lives, right? Like we've realized the benefit and acknowledge that things you learn in one area can apply to another. And the more you learn, the better you can put those things together, right? Or if you think about this concept, that's a podcaster I like, or an author talks about, like talent stacking, taking two, being good at two different things, putting them together to make your unique thing that you're good at. But so companies have just realized the value, right? Naturally. Like for me, again, it was a more natural transition because I was doing digital and websites from a tech team perspective. But that's where the world was moving, right? In terms of marketing. And so again, it's hard to remember a day before, digital marketing, or now we just say marketing because it's all digital. And TV commercials are actually like the dinosaur type thing. But and so I think a natural progression that way. And also the more people do things, somebody has to go first in any change that happens. And if you think about a natural product adoption curve, right, there's the early adopters, the newer people, all the way over to like, it's totally pervasive throughout society. So, I just think it's, again, natural progression. I think we've tried to create specific programs and acknowledge things where we say, like we have a program now that is essentially like taking stretch assignments, or, for 20% of your time, we're going to have you work in a different project. Now, it might not be a different function, but it might be, right? And so, because again, we acknowledge, one, sharing and spreading that knowledge around a company. And again, I think for a company like ours, that's so big and in many ways decentralized, we have 3 major business units: pharmaceutical, medical devices, and consumer. Well, again, there's things in each of those that, yes, are totally unique. Doing a molecule in our pharma business is very different than building a hip in our medical device business. But there's a lot of other stuff that's similar, right? Like manufacturing, supply chain, quality, regulatory, marketing, sales, et cetera. And so, you can become stronger by having more tools in your toolkit, by having more capabilities, more skills, and applying those across different areas. So I think as people have seen value, the world has adapted. I think the other thing that happens, so that's big company, right? But even at small startups, and so I do a lot with startups as well, and have a lot of friends in startups or who started their own companies. And think about even that world, right? Like at first, you start out in a very certain role, but depending on hyper growth or what's required, you're essentially doing any job possible. Like Mark Zuckerberg didn't start out as CEO, or I think that's what his first business card said, as well. But he was doing coding, and now he codes for fun, I think sometimes, but he's not doing a lot of coding anymore, right? And so you naturally progress as the company progresses as well, and as there's more opportunities for you and more, need for you to move into different areas.
Yeah. So related to this is something I'm kind of fielding some of my questions and audience questions, but this is an interesting one. And I'm not sure there's gonna be a single answer for this question, but let me pose it to you anyways. Do you recommend someone to take a position in a related but new function, even if it means laterally or stepping down? Right. So, and that's probably not a single answer, but there's probably various situations where you can make arguments. So I'll leave it to you. How you want to approach that one.
Hey, if that person wants to reach out to me, let's dive into it. I'd love to. Totally open to that. Secondly, so I have done that. So I've progressed really rapidly and come down like 3 levels. I've taken pay cuts. I've done all types of things. I know people who haven't, who've moved laterally. I've moved laterally at times. So I have to say my answer is yes, take it. But it's really about why are you doing that, right? Like I didn't take it because I wanted a pay cut, or I didn't take it because, I took it because I was following my curiosity, because I wanted to learn that new skill, and I believed, and now after 20 years of doing this, you have reference points, right? Like I'd totally be willing to do that now, because I believe that when I'm working on something that I'm more interested in, or following that curiosity or learning something new, like for me, that's energizing. And if I'm going to show up to anything more energized, more focused, more, et cetera, then I think you're going to make up those differences pretty quickly, right? Think about, like, also just another way to take the question. Should I join a smaller company, which I might not have the same title? Well, that depends. Is a smaller company faster growing? Are you going to get to do more things? Do you have more authority than you may have had at the other place? So there's thousands of questions in all this, but I think it really just comes down to what's most important to you, and then what might fulfill that. Titles, money, like all that stuff. I know it sounds, general or generic. That stuff matters a lot less than you actually might think. I think, showing up to work every day, totally energized and enthusiastic, that's way more important for the quality of life and when you're playing the long game. I think you also have to remember, and it was, I can't say I thought about this every time, but ultimately when you're thinking about a long-term career or many careers on your way in your entire life, then, small steps or changes or, what might seem like a certain setback, not really that.
Yeah, it sounds cliche, Matt. I think you threw out some of your grandfather's wisdom at the beginning, but I remember my grandfather's wisdom was just do what you love and the rest will follow.
Yeah, absolutely.
To your point, the more you love what you're doing, the better you're going to do at it, and the more you'll be recognized for it. So I totally, I'm with you on that answer. I think it's a great example. We have a question here. This is kind of going into particularly your space, right? So, and this is a question relative to pursuing a career in learning and development. Any thoughts or recommendations for somebody that really is excited about that path of a career? Any ideas or guidance you might be able to share with someone that finds that an interesting path?
Sure. And again, advice changes depending on where they are and what they mean by that. I think always starting with like, well, why do you think that's the path you want to go down, and really unpacking that, right? That's one. Two, I would say what's really exciting for me nowadays in this space is the space is changing almost more rapidly than anything, right? And many things out there. And so when you look at some of the data, so learning and development is actually the space with the most amount of venture capital funding going into it when you think about technology, right? And so it's like, oh, that's interesting, which means there's rapid growth. There's also a realization that it's incredibly important, right, for not only companies, but for the world, for people to keep reskilling. When you look at governments across the world, they have major reskilling initiatives or skill initiatives in order to like raise populations as well too. Whether you're a small company, whether you're a large company. I remember talking to Peloton, the company, when they were like years ago, and they were ultra small. And one of the things they were doing very early on is bringing in people around learning, right? And so, small company that had hyper growth, big companies, governments everywhere. I think it's a very exciting career. Lots of investment in the space. Go look on any job boards. You'll see a full range of jobs. And again, I think for somebody like me who came from many different backgrounds, one of the things I love is that I get to play on all of my experiences, right? Like there are many days where I'm basically running like an internal P&L around learning and market share and share of voice and all the things that I learned from a marketing area. Most of the work we do nowadays is fully digital. Even when we're in person, we're using like different digital technologies. So my experience is in digital, right? And so I also, that's a little bit of like that part of the take. There's also amazingly smart and incredibly important to our overall group people that I work with that are like IO psychologists, right? That went to school for 20 years, all the way through PhD and multiple things after that in order to totally understand assessment science, for instance. And so I get to work with them as well too. And we get to work with even folks with way more general backgrounds than I. And so that all comes to, if you want a career in that, there's almost endless ways that you can get into it. And so which angle might you want to get into it at? Psychology, neuroscience. So if you want to go study the brain and that angle, it's endless as well too. If you want to come up from a digital perspective, that's incredibly important as well too. Almost any area you can end up in learning and development. So it's incredibly exciting.
It's really interesting. It is a diverse, right? I'm gonna use a comparison, almost like the FBI, right? FBI looks for people with really diverse backgrounds to get into law enforcement investment. And it's so that way in learning. I see that all the time with the work that we do, that it's a very mixed bag of path that brings you into learning. Change gears a little bit for a second. And this has to go with some of the, I'm gonna call it the less structured learning interventions that we've talked about already. things like coaching, things like mentorship, things like some of the rotational. Just if you could, Matt, talk to me through sort of how do those fit inside of one's career, right? Meaning, we often think about it in sort of buckets, right? Your early career, when you're first getting into the workforce, then at some point you become this middle career person, and then you become a sort of a senior person, right? You've got, and I'm not sure that there's real lines between those different parts of your work life, but how do those things maybe fit in? Is there a best place for things like coaching or mentorship, or should it be interwoven throughout? I'm just kind of curious to what your thoughts are.
Yeah, I think really broad and interesting topic. So many things. So I'll try and rein it in a little bit, but I think I don't like using sports analogies generally, right? But what's interesting to me, and somebody was just saying this on a podcast the other day I was listening to, so I'll give her credit, but we find it totally acceptable and common that from like I have young kids, from the very first sport they ever did, like even in first grade. And then when you think about pro athletes, all the way through people, at the top of their game, et cetera, or Olympic athletes, they all have coaches, they all have a support network around them, and we find that totally acceptable. Yet we don't see that in the business world as much, or in the, academic, there's peers and stuff and more. But so it's interesting to me that coaching sort of has a total place in some areas where the goal is to continue to get better, but not in more areas, right? And so I've had coaches, I have multiple coaches right now for different reasons, right? And for different things or different areas of my life even. And why not, right? And coaches have always helped me. I think about mentors. Yes, mentorship changes, and the mentors and what I was getting from them and how I was approaching them and everything was very different early in my career than it is now. But I even, like yesterday, sent an email to somebody basically saying, like, would you please be my mentor? Now, what I'm trying to work with that person on is very different than, again, early on. I think all of those things also come down to relationships. Relationships are really important. I'm generally an introvert and like hate networking. So the idea of like going around and all of that stuff also like makes me cringe. But, and I've never done that to an extremely well or anything, but yet developing relationships with people you work with, keeping in touch is always important. And then I think mentorship also means a lot of things, and it's not a one-way relationship, right? Where even in my example email, it wasn't like, will you be my mentor so I can get this out of you? It was like, okay, what am I going to do for you? All of that. And then there's this concept of sponsorship, which I think is actually really great too, especially for earlier or mid-career. And there's a great book, I think it's like Forget a Mentor, Get a Sponsor. So Forget a Mentor, Get a Sponsor, which talks about the differences, right? And sponsors show up, and there's a different relationship when you think about it in that way, both fulfilling on both sides. And sorry, one more concept that I also love is people often think about mentors like it's this big thing, like I got to go find the perfect one or whatever. One, you can have many, you can have them for many different reasons. I also like, there's also this concept, and I've used it very well, almost like your sort of invisible mentors. And so there's a list of people from, past CEOs or like Bruce Lee or all these other like fictional characters or, people from history that are almost like my invisible mentors, where sometimes when I'm really debating something or really trying to think about something, I'll say, I wonder what Ben Franklin would do here, or I wonder what, Steve Jobs might do here, or things like that as well too. So you don't even need to know or have ever talked to all your mentors as well. All you're trying to get from all of this is additional perspectives and knowledge and a gift that they give you, which is seeing you or giving you feedback in a different way as well too about yourself.
Very interesting. I'm gonna try to pull together again. I'm merging questions, but it's kind of along of my thinking as well. So one of the participants called out an HBR article from 2020 that suggests that employees are being demotivated by their idea, especially as digital and AI continue to drive solutions. How do we approach that, right? From a human capital perspective, balancing technological innovation and the human capital. And even as we look forward, if those two things merge, right? If we look at those things, but then looking towards the future, how do we prioritize certain skills to be innately human and the human value proposition to go up, right? Sorry, I'm pulling a lot into one, but hopefully that makes good sense.
Yeah, and so I don't know the article offhand. I'll go try and check it out, and if there's anything additional, maybe I'll try and post a post on LinkedIn or something. But so thank you for the question, and all the questions. Please keep them coming. But I don't know if this is exactly what the article stated or the intent of the question, and so if not, also please reach out. But I think there is this thing around, what's going to happen when the robots take over. Employees are getting demotivated because we're afraid of losing our jobs out to technology. In many cases, technology can do certain things better, et cetera, et cetera. There's this other side, which is, and we study a lot, almost like burnout demotivation, which is, I can't get away from technology. My phone pings 3,000 times a day, and it's a 24/7 work environment now because, my boss reaches out, or, I'm watching my cryptocurrency price all day long, or whatever other thing is happening in the world. And so they're a little bit different, and learning to be responsible around technology, remove distractions, all that stuff, again, incredibly important, and that creates that space and, all that, using technology appropriately. But I think going back to the part about like robots taking over, right, or being demotivated about the future of that. So I think there's a couple interesting stats around that, and organizations like the World Economic Forum or United Nations have lots of amazing reports about this, because again, governments trying to understand the future of the workforce, right? So one, everybody thought ATMs were going to make less bank tellers, but in fact, there's like many more bank tellers today because of just the access to banking. And so it sort of expanded the whole field, right? Or if you think about an Amazon warehouse, everybody was worried within Amazon, the workers in Amazon warehouses for a while, that the robots that go around and pick and take orders, they're called like the Kiva bots, which are amazing, but they thought that was going to take all the people's job, and you would just have the lights off in a warehouse and your package would be there. There's 100 times more workers, physical workers or human workers in a Amazon warehouse than ever before. Part of that is their growth and all that. But the other thing that happens is like the robots need to be taken care of, right? They need to be oiled, they need to be gas, whatever it is, those things need to be improved and work. So yes, it might be a different skill for somebody who used to put stuff in a box in an Amazon warehouse versus somebody who opens up the lid of a robot and does some annual or weekly maintenance, but the number of jobs will increase overall as well too. And yes, the same exact job that you're doing today might be changed, but that's again another case for this like constant reskilling, learning, growing, challenging yourself to say, what are you interested in, and doing new things as well too. But I think most forecasts say that we're many years away from any real sort of impact of some of that stuff, that at least in the way some people think about it.
Yeah, no, it makes sense. To that point, Matt, I've read a few things that it talks about. When we started at the beginning, we talked about the MBA and the broad perspective. I've seen a lot of research saying that there's more and more companies that are looking for people that have some business knowledge, but also have the back to the liberal arts degree, right? People that can do critical thinking right. Some of the skills that seem to be devalued for a little while seem to be coming back because it plays well in combination with the tech, right? With how do you do the things that the robots can't do well?
Yeah. Well, and I think so often they're called like soft skills, right? Or durable skills. And I know a term you like, Peter, as well too, right? Which is the skills that are going to last forever and don't change, and looking somebody in the eye and being able to talk to them, being able to write really well. One of the skills that is going to continue to increase in importance, and in fact exponentially, is the ability to write, right? Which sounds ludicrous. And when you actually look in the AI world or artificial intelligence world, there's these technologies coming out like GPT-3, which are automatically like writing things and all that type of stuff in nice tone. But Amazon meetings, right? So to use Amazon as an example again, they start with a long form reading of basically the position, the background, everything. And so the beginning of their executive meetings, they read. And that memo that's written, that's basically arguing for a point or providing data, et cetera, it takes weeks and weeks and weeks of refinement in order to write by their senior staff and the teams that are proposing new businesses or new initiatives or decisions. They read and then they discuss, right? So the memo and writing becomes ultra important. Again, being able to converse with people, empathy, storytelling, those things that, again, just are always going to be important for human-to-human connection or service. customer service jobs have skyrocketed, right? Even with all the new technology, new brands, new everything coming out, somebody on the other line of a phone is becoming even more important to the overall experience, because how often do we hate doing phone trees and listening to robots and having to repeat what we said because we're, we can't be heard really well too. So even more reason to focus on fundamentals, I guess, as well.
That's great. So another question here from the audience that talks about personality types, and it really like digs into sort of the traits. In your experience, do you see that there are certain traits that you see in people that they're just more curious for learning, right? Like there's a certain hunger to them, and in contrast to that, are there things that inhibit them from becoming the continuous learner? Like, are there sort of warning signs that say, hey, if I'm exhibiting these sorts of behaviors, I might need to sort of rethink sort of my mindset?
Yeah, I think great question. So a number of things. One, there's probably there are certain things that I am totally a laggard on, right? Like I haven't updated or I don't care about cars, right? And so I have a super old car, and like not fancy old, like it's horrible old, right? And I know a new car would be like better in so many ways and blah, 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 and safer and have like a better integration with my iPod versus the sort of, duct tape version I have today, et cetera. And I even just said iPod, right?
You said iPod, Matt. Wow.
So there's certain things that we're all laggards on, but there's other things that we're probably bleeding edge, right? Like whether it's, they launched new quests in Fortnite an hour ago, which I know because of my son, wanting to play, or, maybe you're really into thermodynamics. And so you're reading the latest papers that come out every year at that conference or what have you, right? Like, so I think it's about thinking, what are the areas that I'm really forward thinking on, and looking and thinking about what you do there and why, again, because you're just interested, and applying those to other areas that might suit you, right? And then secondly, yes, there are traits that you can measure through assessments or through, a little bit of analysis. And for instance, there's a curiosity scale, right? Like, and I'm biased because for me, I'm just like wildly curious, like, right? I want to know everything, try everything, do everything within bounds, et cetera. Responsible is one of the 4 R's of this series. But I have a natural, tendency to go after and check out new things. Again, not in every area, but, et cetera. That's also why I'm interested in human learning, because it's like, wow, how do we continue to inspire that, right? And reskill. And there's people who are further down on that scale, acknowledging that, right? And the first step being awareness, like go take some of these online assessments. There's a ton, and so I don't want to say just one. I type in personality assessment, forget exactly what the name is, but it's one of the 5 factors, right? And so now there's a lot of ridiculous assessments out there that don't mean anything. And if my partners who are the assessment scientists would be able to tell you which ones, but again, you can sort of measure that, but I would just also look for what in your life you're really interested. And again, it comes down to, I don't like the word passion all the time, but like whatever you're most interested in, you're generally going to be curious, and you're interested in it because you're curious. And so it's this interesting cycle, right? Like as well too. So apply whatever things you're doing there into other areas that you want to just get better at or know more about.
That's great. So,
and sorry, real quick, because you asked what anti on that. Again, I'm biased, but it's very obvious when somebody is almost like a know-it-all or isn't interested in learning. Another great term with this or book is growth mindset. So Mindset by Carol Dweck, right? Sort of the beginner of really putting a name towards what this is. And so growth mindset is probably the most important thing that many companies are hiring for nowadays, just to be frank, right? Like when you interview at certain companies, it's either explicit or you might not know it, but they're looking for your growth mindset, right? And so, or to use an example, like with my kids, no matter what they say about them, oh, I don't know this, or, blah, blah, blah. It's always like ... yet, right? Because you just want to keep learning and everything. So I think you can see somebody, or you can even identify in yourself when you're not in that mindset, right? When you're just closed off, you think you know it, you're not willing to explore and everything. So, I think more about growth mindset and how to cultivate that as well in many areas.
So I'm going to close the loop on this one with this last question, Matt. It's going to be a quick answer. are lifelong learners born or made?
Made.
Okay, good.
Because that gives you the power to become one and make sure you're being one. I would also say they're born, though, because everybody learns, like who has the physical ability, everybody learns how to walk.
Yeah.
Again, who has the physical ability learns how to talk. At a certain point, we stop learning, right? Like, but if babies didn't learn, they'd just be mushes on the ground for their entire life. And so we all are born with the ability. Some of us just decide to turn it off in certain areas at times. And so just turn it back on.
No, I mean, I won't dig you too hard. You walked on both sides of that fence, but it was good. It was good. So here's a question. I think this is kind of pulling together a couple of other additional questions that we have from the audience. This is the idea of people getting into the job market. One person finishing an MBA, another one finishing a master's, a different master's degree. And it's the idea of informal short-term internships, right? How important are they in sort of the exploration of interests, career switching? How is it perceived by companies today? Somebody that's had lots of experiences. So it's a kind of multifaceted question, because I think it's the idea of one, how important is it to get lots of experiences, which we've a little bit touched on, but also how is that perceived from the employer perspective if someone has, let's say, use an old term, bouncing around a little bit, right?
Yeah. Again, I think generally, if we were to average, I think the perception has changed greatly, right? Because everybody recognizes, like, there's no longer the 30-year IBM career where you just naturally progress according to the times tables, that they said, oh, you're going to be this level for 4 years, then this level, et cetera. There's still some industries that do that. I don't know them all. I also just have to acknowledge, right, like hiring and like that situation that described is sometimes up to the person looking at the resume at that time, or what his or her filter is, right? So unfortunately, in many cases, there's still human bias in all of those type of decisions. So you can talk to one person who thinks, wow, you've bounced around a lot. That means you have a lot of experience, exposure, you've tried new things. Tell me about how they're all interconnected. At Pepsi, they would call it like the critical experiences, right? So what did you learn from each thing that you can apply together? And somebody else could look at that same thing, even at the same company, and be like, oh, I don't know, they're not committed. So most importantly, it's about you setting the tone and direction and explaining and being able to say that. But even if it is just like, look, I wanted to try a bunch of stuff. Like I said, I joined the program I did because I wanted to, when I first joined J&J, because I wanted to get some different experiences. And that was an asset because that was the design of the program. Now, I also think, I was having this conversation with somebody the other day where it was like, you're also, not that you should purposefully or knowingly go into a job that you're going to leave in 30 days if you don't like it, because you want to give things time and you don't know. I mean, you need to let things simmer a little bit. But you're also not beholden to say, hey, my next decision on where I go work, I'm committed to for 20 years. Like I've had 14 different careers or et cetera, or depending on how you count it, like 17 different roles. Now, granted, I'm still at the same company in those last 20 years, just because we're big, we offer a lot of things. And so, that fit me well. But you can go get the experience, do what you want, and take control of your career, like manage your career, as well too. So, and yes, I think on average, we would say the more experiences, exposures are good. As well, whether that's internships or short stints. I would also say, so, I think people also get locked into like, well, I do my job and that's it. And so like, if you were to just look at a resume, it was like, yep, I only did that. I've learned more, and I have many colleagues who have learned more sort of different or been exposed to different things by the other stuff they do, right? Not saying everybody needs to work 24/7. That's not my style either. But, I teach at Rutgers, right? And so that gives me a whole different experience as well too. I'm on the board of nonprofits. I have a lot of other random stuff I do that might not seem connected, but has given me different skills or understandings or a view into that world, right? That's like, oh, okay. And so, I think you can also get that experience in many other ways, even while you're working as well too.
That's great. I do like the idea, the nugget. I'm pull it back out and repeat it here. it's the narrative, right? So even if you have different experiences, how can you lace them together? And what is thoughtfully, what is the key thing that you learned, either positive or negative about it, right? You decide, oh, I really didn't like this, I'm going to stay away from this from now on, or I really like this, I'm going to go deeper. All of those, I think, are worthwhile experiences as long as there's a takeaway from it. So thank you for that.
Yeah, so and sorry, just on that, it's funny because I think in some ways, right, like we think about our behavior in other areas, and I'll say to people sometimes, treat your career with as much respect as you treat your phone, right? You update your phone, you try new apps, you delete things that don't work, you ask people what works. In my case, sometimes like I'll go on to somewhere and like look up, tips and tricks for a phone because the new software came out. So you're always like updating, checking out how to use, removing stuff from our phones, even for folks who might still have a flip phone or whatever. Like there's things you do in that respect, and yet again we don't apply that same mentality to things like our career or our learning or the way we approach schooling or learning as well too. So
that's great. I love this question, Matt. If you could give yourself a piece of advice, right? What's the one piece of advice that you wish you could have given yourself, your younger self, now, right? So what have you learned now that you wish you could go back and say, early career, make sure you do this, younger version of Matt?
There's probably some cliche answers like take more risks, things. So even though some people might consider some of it risky, right? Like I've also been at the same company for 20 years, and so there's some, not to say so I also highly recommend J&J and doing that. I wouldn't be here if it wasn't absolutely amazing. So maybe stepping back, especially now, because again, when I started, it was very different. Like I had a computer on my desk. So when I went home, there was no work, right? Like I could think about work, and I would do stuff somewhat, but like it was totally different. I think what sets people apart now, or the advice I try to give to people in this world now at that point, is to relax a little bit. And understand it's all going to work out. And again, that seems cliche, but not pandemic aside. So even if we weren't in COVID, like the amount of pressure that people are under in our daily lives is just, immense and horrible, and is having real public health, ramifications and everything, and personal health ramifications and everything like that. And so, even with still trying to reskill yourself and stay ahead of the curve, or, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, like, relax a little bit. Again, I know it sounds cliche, but that space and that, like, you can see people, and I see it, in all different stages of life, or whatever you want to call it, who allow, or who unfortunately have like the pressure built up so much on themselves that like it just shuts down parts of yourself, and you're not able to do your best work. You're not able to be your best friend, et cetera, et cetera. But the people who take the time to manage it. So if you're going to learn one skill, learn how to manage that stuff, right? Learn how to protect your self-care. So,
do you think some of that comes from, again, lots of in vogue stuff, but the mindfulness piece, right? Is how to be reflective, find peace, find, a state of sort of, I don't want to say flow, but like removing some of those.
The two fastest growing areas in learning are mindfulness and flow, right? Yeah. So, and why? Because you are performing at a different level when you're more intentional, mindful, and calm. Yes. And when you're able to get yourself in flow more regularly, you're able to do better work, right? And so they're both also incredibly ethereal concepts that, like, you could spend your entire lifetime like a monk and never achieve nirvana or state of mindfulness. And flow is this, again, even though it's being studied, there's a lot of things going on in that area, and have been. It's really hard to understand, and you can't purposely get yourself in flow, right? You can only create the conditions that may allow that to happen. But again, you can do a little bit every day, and it's because we're in a completely different world than we were. And again, COVID aside, we're in a completely different type of world and connection than we were even 2 years ago, 5 years ago. Like, many of us remember the days without cell phones. Now, if it's more than 4 feet away from you, you get panic attacks, and so it's an interesting world to try to learn in.
So I'm being respectful of the time, Matt. I'm gonna have to close this out on one last question, and it's to help us all be better lifelong learners. We want to know what's on your short list right now. Podcasts, books. Where are you going for your inspiration, if you don't mind?
Yeah, I'm gonna maybe look up podcasts while I also say so. Again, being a curious individual, I like to try a lot of podcasts. Big fan of like Tim Ferriss. So he's, definitely on my library. Tim Ferriss, Seth Godin, Godin, like amazing. I also have like the podcasts are, again, just another example of like podcasting wasn't a thing X years ago. I mean, whatever. And now any single topic you want, you can go search and get 500 podcasts on in a minute with the top people in the world, or maybe they're complete idiots, but you learn something, right? So How I Built This, that's another great one. The Knowledge Project, another great one. Work Life with Adam Grant, Kevin Roche. I mean, I have a whole bunch, but and then books. Again, I think it depends on what subject you want. I would say just on this topic, right? Yes. The #1 Coursera course, at least last year, was Learning How to Learn, which I pulled off my shelf here. Is also a virtual background. I won't allow me to show, but Learning How to Learn is a great book because it teaches you and helps you understand like a framework for learning. Like there's a way, spending time learning how to do anything helps you. So if your goal is learning, spend time learning how to learn, right? Atomic Habits, I'm big into habit formation because, building systematic processes into your life. And then the #1 book I always recommend because it completely transformed my life way, way, way long ago is like a classic. It's How to Win Friends and Influence People.
Love it. Awesome. Matt, this was a really fun. I mean, I apologize to there's probably 4 or 5 other questions we didn't get a chance to get to. I apologize to those attendees that we didn't get to, but man, I thought we covered a lot of ground in a short amount of time, and it was just a really fun conversation. Lots to think about. Thanks again. I'm gonna turn it over to Margaret. I know she has a few last words, but a real pleasure, Matt. Thank you for
thank you for the opportunity. Thank you, everyone, and please reach out if there's any further questions or anything like that. And thank you, Margaret, so much.
Oh, well, thank you guys so much. I have to say, I certainly learned a lot, but I think the most surprising piece of information was to find out that you're not into cars. But thank you again, both Matt and Peter, for your time, the engaging and relevant conversation about corporate culture and lifelong learning. This is clearly a personal passion for both of you. I want to thank our audience for enhancing the discussion with their enthusiastic participation. We can download that Q&A and share it with you, Matt, to potentially address any of those questions that we didn't get to speak to today. And then just a friendly reminder to everyone who's listening, our series takes place on Thursdays at noon Eastern. And for 2021, we're trying to be consistently sticking with the second Thursdays. We will be sending out information about our next speaker, who is Ritu Favre, the Vice President and General Manager at National Instruments. And we do have a little bit of a survey coming up for those who are here with us live, and we hope that you'll continue sharing ideas with us because we want our series to continue to meet your needs. There's a free-form field in one of those questions, so you can suggest topics and or speakers you'd like to see featured in the future. I mentioned this at the beginning, but I'll mention it again. A link to the archived recording of this presentation will be shared via social media and emailed to those who have registered. It will also appear on the Business Insights page of our website. So thank you everyone so much. Have a great rest of your day.